In this video, we're going to discuss decimals and percents. Before we get too involved with decimals, we want to review decimal places. All right. So I have 0.1234567 and I want to make sure that we are all aware or on the same page when it comes to calling these digits or these decimal places. One decimal place after the 0 is called your tenths place. Okay, so it's 10 with a THS. Two decimal places is your hundreds. And three decimal places, thousandths. And as you can guess, it's going to continue to kind of repeat itself. Kind of like after, we go 10, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s when we're talking about whole decimal places. All right, but I'm going to basically stop here. All right, we have 10,000ths, 100,000ths, 100,000ths, millionths, 10 millions, so on and so forth. Those are our decimal places. Once we know how to do decimal places, we want to go ahead and review how we add, subtract, multiply, and divide decimals. I'm going to start with addition and subtraction. All right, adding and subtracting decimals. When we want to do that, all we have to do is line up our decimal places, all right? Now line up the decimals and add or subtract like whole numbers. Add or subtract like the whole numbers. Now when we do subtraction, make sure we keep in mind the stuff about positive and negatives. But let's look at this example here where we add 9.62 and 4.583, all right? To add those two numbers together, I'm going to write my 9.62. And with the 4.583, I've got to line up my decimal place. So the 4 is going to have to go under the 9. I have my decimal. I have 583 after the decimal place. And I add. All right. Now notice anytime we have a digit missing after the decimal, we can always add a 0. All right. So after a decimal, you can always add a 0. All right. Now we're going to add 0 and 3. Well, that will give me 3. 2 and 8, that gives me 10 hundredths. I can carry the 1 to one of the hundreds to the tenths place. And I have 6, 5, and 1, which is 12. Carry the 1. Put my decimal. And 4 and 9 is 13 plus 1 is 14. So we get 14.203 as our solution. All right. It's just the same as most adding and subtracting whole numbers. Just make sure your decimal stays in the correct place. Line them up. Decimal stays the same. All right. Multiplication is very similar to multiplying whole numbers, right? We're going to do the exact same thing, but all we have to do is remember that when we finish multiplying, our product should have the same number of decimals at decimal places as the two factors. Let's look at 3.47 times 5.2. All right, we don't necessarily line up our decimals in this case, right? So I have 3.47, and 5.2 is just 2 digits. So I'm going to put the 5 under the 4, put my decimal, and then 2. And then we'll multiply. I'm going to multiply the 2 by 3.47. I get 4, carry the 1. 14, carry the 1. I get 8, 9, and 2 times 3 is 6. All right, now I'm going to multiply 5 by 3.47. 5 times 7 is 35. I'll write down my 5 and I'll carry my 3. 4 times 5 is 20 plus 3 is 23. I'm going to write down the 3, carry the 2. 15 times 2 is 17. All right. And so now I add my digits. So I have 4. 9 and 5 is 14. Carry the 1. 6 plus 3 plus 1 is 10. Write down the 0. Carry the 1. 7 plus 1 is 8. And 1 plus 0 is just 1. All right. Notice here I have 2 decimal places after the 3 and 1 decimal place after the 2. Of course, when I write my answer, the decimal place starts at the end, but I'm going to move it 1, 2, 3 spaces. So my solution is going to be 18.044. All right. So that's multiplying decimals. Let's go now to division. When I divide decimals, one thing to always make sure is that your divisor, or the thing that you're dividing by, is a whole number. All right, we don't divide by decimal because it's really hard to kind of think of it. So we just multiply or move our decimal. to make our divisor a whole number. Then we divide like we normally would do whole numbers, all right? So I have 9.568 divided by 2.3. This 2.3 is my divisor, the thing that I'm dividing by, all right? So what we normally do with long division, 2.3 divided by 9.568, all right? Now, my decimal place needs to be moved one place to the right in order for me to have a whole divisor, all right? If I do that, I have to do it to my dividend as well. And so instead of it being 2.3, I'm actually going to have 23 divided into 95.68. All right, and so now I got to do my division. So what I want to do is see how many times does 23 go into, well, it doesn't go in 9, into 95, all right? All right, and so you might need some scratch paper, but it goes into 95 at most 4 times. And the reason I know that is because 23 times 4 is 92. All right, then we'll subtract. We get a 3. I'm going to bring down my next digit. And I'm going to go ahead and write my decimal. Now I start the process over again. How many times does 23 go into 26? Well, it goes in there 1 time. 23 times 1 is 23. And then I'll subtract off again. I'll get 13. Bring down my 8. And now I want to see how many times does 23 go into 138. And it goes in there 6 times because 6 times 23 is 138. We subtract, we get a remainder of 0. So 9.568 divided by 2.3 is 4.16. Now, although we move our decimal here at the beginning, we don't have to worry about moving our decimal at the end. This is true, right? This is completely our solution. And you know you can always check yourself by doing your solution. So if I take my 4.16 and if I multiply it by my divisor 2.3, 4.16 times 2.3, you get that 9.568. All right, so there's always a way for you to check your solution here. All right, now that we know how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide for decimals, we're going to relate them to fractions. All right. So when we first started talking about fractions, we stated that fractions allowed us to get numbers between whole numbers. And decimals are exactly the same, right? So decimals are the numbers that can be in between our whole numbers. And so if fractions and decimals are numbers that are between our whole numbers, then we can rewrite fractions as decimals and decimals as fractions. Let's look at an example here. It says rewrite the fraction as a decimal. We have 5 over 16. Well, if you look at that 5 over 16, it is actually a division, right? 5 over 16, the fraction has a division symbol, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do the division, all right? We always put our lower number, our bottom number, our denominator, under the fraction, and my numerator inside our division symbol, okay? Of course, 16 doesn't go into 5, so I'm going to add a decimal and a 0. And then I'm going to try to use my division technique to come up with the decimal. So let's start. How many times does 16 go into 50? At most 3 times. Because 3 times 16 is 48. If I subtract, I'm going to get a remainder. And if you want to do all that, a remainder of 2. All right. What I want to do is I don't want to stop until I get a remainder of 0. So I'm going to continue to add zeros anytime I get a remainder. All right. So I'm going to bring down a 0. 16 goes into 20 1 time. 16 times 1 is 16. Subtract that from 20. We get 4. Right. That's not 0. So I'm going to add another decimal place. Right, and bring down this 0. 16 goes into 40 at most 2 times. 2 times 40. 2 times 16 is 32. Subtract that, I get 8. That's not 0, so I'm going to add another 0, bring it down. And I want to see how many times does 16 go into 80. Well, 16 goes into 80 5 times. 5 times 16 is 80, and we get a remainder of 0. All right, so 5 over 16 is the same as 0.3125. All right, these are both numbers between 0 and 1. This is how it looks as a fraction. This is how it looks as a decimal. All right. Now let's go the other way around. We want to, and I'm going to erase what we kind of had there. What we want to do now is to, hold on one second. We're going to go the other way around, right? If I look at 0.56, all right, that 6 is in the hundredths place. So if I were to read this, this would be 56 hundredths, all right? That's the same as saying 56 over 100. So our decimal places, looking at that last decimal place, would actually tell us what fraction we get when we do this division here, all right? Since that 6 is in the hundredths place, I'm going to divide it by 100. If it was in the tenths place, I would divide by 10. If it was in the thousandths place, I would divide by 1,000, so on and so forth. Now that I've rewritten this as a decimal, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify, right? 56 and 100 have a common factor of 4, all right? 4 goes into 56 14 times, and 4 goes into 125 times. So 14 divided by 25 is the same thing as 0.56. All right. Again, those are two numbers that are between whole numbers, the whole numbers of 0 and 1. And that's how they look as a fraction and as a decimal. Let's continue. Now we want to talk about what we call percents. All right. And so, of course, fractions come in all different denominators, all different ways, right? And you can have as many denominators as possible. Well, if we want to kind of compare things or kind of characterize things, it'd be nice to kind of do it in a sort of a uniform way. And this is where percents come into play. Basically, the definition of a percent, in my opinion, very informal definition though, is basically how much out of 100. So when I say 50%, I mean 50 out of 100. When I say 25%, I mean 25 out of 100. All right. And so what we're going to do is we want to use that knowledge of percents and apply it to fractions and decimals, which may not necessarily be out of 100. Right. And so this is what we're going to do. When we rewrite percents as fractions and decimals, so we start with a percent and we're going to go to a fraction or a decimal, we're just going to use the definition, right? Percent is how much out of 100. Well, I'll take the whatever percent I have and divide it by 100. And I'm just going to leave my answer as either a fraction or a decimal based on what the problem asked me for. Let's look at an example. Part A, it says to rewrite 60% as a fraction. Well, 60%, right? Percent means how much out of 100. So I'm going to take the 60 that's in front of my percent symbol and divide it by 100. And there I go. I have a fraction. All right. Now, of course, we're going to want to simplify the fraction, keep it in simplest form. And so I'm going to divide out by their greatest common factor. So if I think the factors of 16 and factors of 20, of course, 10 is a common factor, but 20 is also, right? So I'm going to divide the top and the bottom of this fraction by 20. 20 goes into 63 times. It goes into 105 times. And so 60% as a fraction is the same thing as 3/5. Okay? And this is going to be very important to know how to do this, because as we get more and more involved in math, when we do operations that involve operations with percents, we're going to either have to change it to a decimal, a fraction, or a decimal. All right, let's look at how we change a percent to a decimal. All right, in this example, we're going to change 5% to a decimal. All right, now since I know I need a decimal, all right, I'm going to divide it by 100. I'm going to have 5 divided by 100. But since I want a decimal, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and do the long division. I don't even have to worry about writing it as a fraction. All right, 100 is my divisor. It goes on the outside. 5 goes under my long division symbol. And I need to add 0 so I can actually do the division. All right, so I put my 0 up here. Of course, 100 doesn't go into 50, but it does go into 500 5 times. All right, because 5 times 100 is 500, and we get a remainder of 0. So 5% is the same thing as 0.05 or 0.05. One trick that a lot of people use is that you take the percent, remove the percent symbol, put your decimal there, and move it 2 places to the left. 1, 2. And so we get that 0.05, right? All right, that's how a lot of people remember. When you divide by 100, you move your decimal 2 places to the left. So changing a percent to a decimal just means take the decimal that you have, move it 2 places to the left. Now what we want to do is we want to go the other way around, all right? We want to be able to rewrite fractions and decimals as percents, all right? Since we're going the other way around, and before going from a percent to a decimal, we divided by 100. Well, in order to go from fractions and decimals to percents, we have to multiply by 100. Let's look at some examples. All right, this first example, I have 17 over 20. I want to write this as a percent. So I'm going to take 17 over 20, and I'm going to multiply it by 100. Of course, with multiplication, we need to have two fractions. Of course, I can make 100 an improper fraction by writing it over 1. All right, now that I have this, I can cross cancel. Let's see if 20 and 100 have any common factors. They actually do. 20 goes into 20 and 100. It goes into 20 one time. It goes into 100 5 times. And those are our only common factors. And so if I want to know what my solution is going to be in this example here, I multiply the 7 times the 5, which is 85, over 1. 1 times 1 is 1. Of course, when we divide by 1, we're left with that 85. So 17 over 20 is the same thing as 85%. Okay? And last but not least, we're going to look at 0.26. I want to rewrite that as a percent. Again, we're going to multiply by 100. So I'll take this 0.26 and multiply it by 100. Well, if I multiply by 100, remember from before, when you divide it by 100, you move your decimal 2 places to the left. Well, an easy or a quick way to do this is to move it 2 places to the right. And if I move it 2 places to the right, I get 26. So 0.26 is 26%. If you don't want to remember whether you go to the right or to the left, just go ahead and do the multiplication as you normally would. All right, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and 6, 2, 0. You have to remember that you add, and so you get 0, 0, 6, 2, 0. You started with 2 decimal places, so you move it 1, 2. And of course, in a whole number, you don't need a 0 in front of any of the digits, so this is still 26%. Okay. All right, and this concludes our video on decimals and percents.